There are some wounds that money can't heal, and some betrayals that time can't erase. I spent 40 years putting my children first, working double shifts, skipping meals, sacrificing everything so they could have what they needed. Then I watched through a neighbor's cell phone video as my daughter got married without me. My chair empty, my name erased, the wedding I paid for with my retirement savings. That night, I canceled their credit cards and blocked the automatic transfers that had supported them for years. I expected silence. What I didn't expect was my oldest son showing up at my door at 3 a.m., trembling and desperate, holding a letter he'd written years ago, but never had the courage to send. "Mom," he whispered, dropping to his knees, "I need to tell you what they're planning to do to you, and why I can't let it happen, even though I'm dying." If this story of family betrayal, unexpected redemption, and the courage to stand up for yourself when everyone expects you to just disappear quietly touches your heart, please like, subscribe, and share. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from, and if you've ever had to make the difficult choice between forgiveness and self-respect. I sat there on my sofa that Saturday night, wearing my freshly pressed best dress and those shoes I'd bought on installment plan, waiting for someone to knock on my door or at least call. But all I heard were the echoes of laughter from a video my neighbor showed me on her phone. My youngest daughter getting married, dancing with my ex-husband, my oldest son. Everyone was there. Me? Nothing. Not even an empty chair. Not my name among the decorations. I was the only one who didn't know the exact location of the event until I saw it on my daughter-in-law's Instagram. They said it didn't make sense to expose me to all the commotion after I paid for the catering with my life savings. There's one image I can't get out of my head. A woman who looked like me, seen from behind, serving the wedding cake. For a split second, I thought it was me, but it was just the venue's waitress. Her dress was prettier than mine. "Martha, you really shouldn't torture yourself like this," my neighbor Judy said, patting my hand as she scrolled through more photos. "Your Melissa looked beautiful though, didn't she?" I nodded, forcing a smile that felt like it might crack my face. 58 years old, and here I was, excluded from my own daughter's wedding. The wedding I had scraped together $8,000 to help pay for. Because, Mom, we want the perfect day, and you always said you'd help us. "Did they at least mention you in the speeches?" Judy asked, her voice dripping with that particular kind of pity reserved for abandoned mothers. "I don't know," I whispered. "I didn't watch the whole video. But I knew, of course I knew. If they couldn't find room for me at the actual event, they certainly wouldn't waste precious microphone time acknowledging the woman who had raised them alone after their father walked out 23 years ago." That night after Judy left, I closed my recipe book, the one where I'd been collecting special dishes to prepare for the wedding reception they had originally asked me to help with. I locked my kitchen, walked to my bedroom, and opened the banking app on my phone. My hands weren't even shaking anymore. Something inside me had gone completely still. I canceled the 2 additional credit cards linked to my account, the ones my daughter and son had been using since college. Then I blocked the automatic transfers that had been supporting my daughter's household for years, $300 every month like clockwork. Because, Mom, we're just getting started, you know how expensive Boston is these days. For the first time in decades, I didn't cry. I felt nothing but a cold, steady clarity as I watched the confirmation messages appear on my screen. No more. Not one more dollar. Not one more night lying awake wondering if I was being selfish for feeling hurt. I took a sleeping pill and crawled into bed, wondering if anyone would even notice what I'd done, wondering if they'd care. As the medication began to take effect, I thought about all the birthday parties I'd organized, all the Christmas mornings I'd made magical on a shoestring budget, all the school events I'd attended alone while their father built his new family across town. And then, at 3 a.m., the doorbell rang. At first I thought I was dreaming. It rang again, followed by urgent knocking. I pulled on my robe and shuffled to the door, heart hammering against my ribs. Through the peephole I saw him, Henry, my oldest, trembling with red-rimmed eyes and hair damp with sweat. He looked like he'd been running, or crying, or both. When I opened the door, He didn't speak. He just stood there, clutching a carefully folded envelope as if it contained something alive and fragile. He didn't apologize. He didn't say anything about the wedding. He just dropped to his knees right there on my welcome mat and said, "Mom, forgive me. I lost my way." As he sobbed on my carpet, all I could think was, why now? Why just him? What happened after the party? In the back of my mind, a memory kept trying to surface. A letter he'd given me when he was 12, promising he would never let anyone treat me badly. He held out the envelope with shaking hands. I opened it, my own fingers trembling. It was the same letter from all those years ago. But on the back, there was something written in an adult's handwriting. "I came back because you might be the only one who can forgive me for what I've hidden." I looked at my son, this grown man broken on my floor, and I felt something crack inside my chest. Not forgiveness, not yet, but a door opening just enough to let in a sliver of light. "Come inside," I said finally, "and tell me everything." I led Henry into the kitchen and sat him at the old oak table where he used to do his homework. The same table where, decades ago, I'd told him and his sister that their father wasn't coming back. The fluorescent light buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across his tear-stained face. My son, my firstborn, looked so much older than his 42 years, with deep lines etching the corners of his eyes and a slight tremor in his hands that I'd never noticed before. "Tea?" I asked, more out of habit than hospitality. I needed something to do with my hands, something to focus on besides the raw pain etched across his face. Henry nodded, still clutching that envelope like a lifeline. I filled the kettle and set it on the stove, watching the blue flame lick at the metal bottom. The kitchen clock ticked loudly in the silence between us, each second stretching like taffy. "I didn't know," he finally whispered, his voice hoarse, "about the wedding venue. About Melissa telling you it was at the Ridgewood when it was really at the Carlton. I swear, Mom." I turned to face him, leaning against the counter. "But you were there." It wasn't a question. I'd seen him in the photos, standing tall in his charcoal suit, smiling next to his sister in her flowing white gown. "I was," he admitted, shoulders slumping further. "When I realized you weren't coming, I asked Melissa where you were. She said you weren't feeling well, that you'd decided to stay home." His voice cracked. I believed her. God help me, I wanted to believe her. The kettle whistled, piercing the tension. I poured steaming water over the tea bags, watching the water turn amber. Some stains, I thought, set too deep to ever truly wash out. "And when did you realize the truth?" I asked, setting a mug in front of him. My voice sounded alien to my own ears. Calm, steady, when everything inside me was screaming. Henry looked up at me, his eyes bloodshot. "When Melissa made the toast. She thanked everyone for coming, especially Dad and his new wife for stepping up financially when it counted. That's when I knew." He swallowed hard. "Because I knew you'd given her your savings for this wedding. I knew because you told me back in March." I sat down across from him, cradling my own mug. The heat burned against my palms, but I welcomed the pain. It was clean, simple, unlike the complicated ache inside my chest. I confronted her at the reception. Henry continued, staring into his tea. "She laughed it off, said you were being dramatic, that you'd known where it was but chose not to come because you couldn't handle seeing Dad happy. Then she said something else." He trailed off, struggling. "What?" I pressed. "She said, 'Mom's had her turn playing the victim. She doesn't get to ruin my day, too.' And Dad was standing right there nodding along." Henry's voice broke. I left, just walked out, drove around for hours. I watched him carefully, wondering if this was just guilt, if he'd come seeking absolution so he could sleep at night, then disappear again. But there was something more in his trembling hands, in the way he couldn't quite meet my eyes. "And the envelope?" I asked, nodding towards the folded paper he still gripped. He pushed it across the table. "I wrote this when I was 12. Do you remember? How could I forget? It was after a particularly nasty argument with his father, one of the last before the divorce. Henry had found me crying in the bathroom and had slipped this note under the door, a child's promise to always protect his mother. I kept it. I said softly. In my jewelry box. I know. I found it there tonight. He hesitated. I went to your house first. When you didn't answer, I used the spare key. I needed to see if you were okay. A question formed on my lips. Why tonight? Why after all these years? But before I could ask, Henry turned over the envelope, pointing to the writing on the back. In the harsh kitchen light, the words seemed to pulse. I came back because you might be the only one who can forgive me for what I've hidden. What have you hidden, Henry? I asked, feeling a chill despite the warm tea in my hands. He looked up then, and in his eyes I saw something I hadn't seen since he was small, raw, unfiltered fear. Something terrible, Mom. Something I've been carrying for years. His voice dropped to a whisper, and I think it's killing me. I reached across the table and took his hand. It felt like a child's hand again, vulnerable, seeking protection. Whatever anger I'd been nursing dissolved into something else. Not forgiveness, not yet, but the shadow of a mother's instinct to shield her child, even from himself. Then tell me, I said simply. Tell me everything. I sat across from Henry at the kitchen table, my tea growing cold between my hands. The old analog clock on the wall ticked loudly in the silence, each second stretching out as my son gathered the courage to speak. Outside, the first hints of dawn were beginning to lighten the sky, turning the kitchen window from black to deepest blue. I need to show you something first, Henry finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone. His fingers trembled as he unlocked it and pulled up what appeared to be a recording app. I wasn't planning to record anything at the wedding, but when Melissa made that toast, he pressed play, and my daughter's voice filled the kitchen, light, happy, slightly slurred from champagne. I want to thank everyone for coming today, especially Dad and Stephanie for stepping up financially when it counted. There was a pause, the clink of glasses, scattered laughter. To family, the ones we choose to keep around. My chest tightened. I'd spent 30 years putting those kids first, working double shifts, skipping meals, foregoing new clothes so they could have what they needed. And here was my daughter, erasing me from her life like I was nothing more than an inconvenient memory. Henry stopped the recording. There's more, he said, scrolling to another file. This was after I confronted her. He hit play again. This time the background noise was different. The sounds of a bathroom, water running, voices muffled by a closed door. Jesus, Henry, why are you making such a big deal about this? Melissa's voice was irritated now. Mom's had her turn playing the victim for decades. She doesn't get to ruin my day, too. She paid for half this wedding, Mel, with her retirement money. A derisive laugh. Yeah, well, that's what mothers are supposed to do, isn't it? Besides, she'd just make Dad uncomfortable. And frankly, she'd embarrass me in front of Bryce's family. You know how she is. Always talking about her struggles, wearing those awful discount store clothes. I flinched at the cruelty in my daughter's voice, a physical pain blooming beneath my ribs. This isn't you, Mel, Henry's recorded voice said. When did you become so cold? Oh, spare me the moral high ground, she snapped. You're not exactly winning Son of the Year. At least I'm honest about cutting her off. You just keep stringing her along while hiding everything from her. Tell me, does she know about your business ventures? Does she know you've been using her identity? Does she know about Josh? The recording ended abruptly. Henry couldn't meet my eyes. Who is Josh? I asked, my voice hollow. And what does she mean about using my identity? Henry rubbed his face with both hands, looking suddenly 10 years older. Josh is my son, he said finally. He's 7. His mother, she doesn't let me see him much. I sat very still, absorbing this information. A grandson I never knew existed. 7 years of birthdays and Christmases, first words and first steps, all lost to me. Why? The word came out like a croak. Why would you keep him from me? At first it was complicated with Tanya, Josh's mom. We weren't together and she was difficult. Then as time went on, it seemed harder and harder to explain why I'd kept him a secret. He swallowed hard. And then there was the other thing. What other thing, Henry? Something cold was creeping up my spine. a premonition of worse revelations to come. 6 years ago, I was in trouble, bad trouble. I'd made some investments that didn't pan out. I was looking at bankruptcy, maybe worse. He closed his eyes. I was desperate. I took out some loans. What kind of loans? My question hung in the air between us. The kind that come with high interest and scary collection methods, he admitted. And when I couldn't pay, I did something unforgivable. The kitchen seemed to shrink around me, the walls pressing in. Tell me, I used your information, your social security number, your birth date, your credit history. It was just supposed to be temporary, just to get some breathing room until a deal I was working on came through. His words tumbled out faster now. But the deal fell through, and then things snowballed. I kept telling myself I'd fix it before you ever found out. I felt dizzy, disconnected from my body. Are you saying you committed identity theft? Against your own mother? He nodded miserably. The loans are paid off now. I managed to settle everything a bit dicked, but I was terrified you'd find out, that you'd hate me. And that's why you came tonight, because you felt guilty? My voice had gone flat, emotionless. No, he whispered. I mean, yes, I've felt guilty for years, but that's not why I'm here now. He looked up at me, his eyes swimming with tears. I found out something a few months ago, something I've been trying to deal with on my own. What? I asked, though part of me already knew, had sensed it in his too thin frame, the hollows under his eyes, the desperation in his posture. I'm sick, Mom, really sick. His voice broke, and I'm scared. Not just for me, but for Josh, for what will happen to him if... He couldn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. I understood now why he'd come, why he'd chosen this night to confess. He wasn't just seeking forgiveness. He was seeking shelter, a place where he could be weak, where he could be cared for, a place where someone would remember him, fight for him, love him unconditionally, even when he didn't deserve it. I thought of the wedding I hadn't been invited to, the grandson I hadn't known existed, the violation of trust that had apparently been going on for years. By all rights, I should throw him out, tell him to find someone else to be his safety net. Instead, I reached across the table and took his hand. How sick? I asked. The sunrise was filtering through my kitchen blinds when Henry finally dozed off on the couch, exhaustion claiming him mid-sentence. I covered him with the old Afghan my mother had crocheted decades ago, the one I'd kept through 3 moves and countless life changes. His breathing was shallow, with an occasional catch that hadn't been there before. Or maybe I just hadn't noticed. I couldn't sleep. My mind was racing, trying to process everything Henry had told me. The identity theft, the secret grandson, and now this. An illness he wouldn't name directly, only saying it was aggressive and not responding to treatment. When I'd pressed for details, he'd become evasive, his eyes darting away from mine. I moved quietly through my small house, collecting the tea mugs, straightening magazines, the mindless tasks that had always helped me think. In the bathroom, I opened the medicine cabinet to take an aspirin for my throbbing headache. That's when I noticed something odd, a prescription bottle with my name on it that I didn't recognize. Oncology Associates of Massachusetts was printed on the label. The medication was something I couldn't pronounce. The date was recent, just 3 weeks ago. I stared at it, confused. I hadn't been to an oncologist. I hadn't been prescribed this medication. And then, like a puzzle piece clicking into place, I remembered what Henry had said about using my identity. With trembling fingers, I took the bottle and went to my small home office. I began opening drawers, searching through papers I hadn't looked at in months. In the back of my filing cabinet, I found a manila folder I didn't recognize. Inside was a stack of medical paperwork, all with my name, all from doctors I'd never visited, all for treatments I'd never received. Blood tests, biopsies, scans, all detailed a progressive disease that wasn't mine. My chest tightened as I flipped through the pages. The most recent report was dated just 2 weeks ago, and it wasn't good. Patient continues to decline. Treatment options limited. Recommend hospice consultation. The room seemed to tilt around me. I gripped the edge of my desk to steady myself. Papers scattered across the surface. This wasn't just identity theft for financial gain. Henry had been using my health insurance, my medical identity, to cover his own treatments. And according to these reports, those treatments weren't working. I heard a noise behind me and turned to find Henry standing in the doorway, his face ashen in the early morning light. "I was going to tell you," he whispered, eyes fixed on the papers in front of me, "about all of it." "How long?" I asked, my voice sounding foreign to my own ears. "How long have you been pretending to be me?" He leaned against the doorframe, suddenly looking much older than his 42 years. "The first time was about 8 months ago. I had symptoms, but no insurance. I'd let it lapse after the divorce." He swallowed hard. "I just needed to see a doctor, get some tests. I thought it would be nothing, stress, maybe, or exhaustion. I was going to pay you back. But it wasn't nothing." "No!" His voice cracked. "It wasn't nothing." I picked up one of the reports. "Stage 4 pancreatic cancer with metastasis to the liver," I read aloud. The clinical words felt like stones in my mouth. "Terminal." Henry nodded, unable to speak. "And all these treatments?" I gestured to the stack of bills and reports. "Chemotherapy, radiation, experimental trials at Mass General, all under my name." "I know it was wrong," he said, tears streaming down his face now. "I know it was criminal, but I was desperate, Mom. I didn't want to die. And I didn't want Josh to grow up without ever really knowing me." The mention of my grandson, this child I'd never met, sent a fresh wave of pain through me. How many betrayals could fit into one night? "Where is he now?" I asked. "Josh, with his mother. She has full custody. She only lets me see him every other weekend, and lately—" He trailed off, gesturing vaguely at his thin frame. "Lately, I haven't been well enough." I gathered the papers into a neat stack, my practical nature taking over as it always did in crisis. "Does she know about your condition?" "No. Nobody knows except my oncologist. Well, your oncologist, technically." He attempted a weak smile that didn't reach his eyes. "And now you." I stood up, moved past him into the hallway, headed for the kitchen. He followed, uncertain. "Mom, what are you doing?" I opened a drawer, pulled out a notepad and pen, and began making a list. It was what I always did when faced with problems too big to solve all at once. Break it down. Take it step by step. "First," I said, not looking up, "we need to get your medical records corrected. You'll need your own insurance." "Mom, did you hear what I said? It's terminal. Insurance won't cover—" "I don't care what it won't cover," I interrupted, finally meeting his gaze. "We'll figure it out. Second, I need to meet Josh. Today." Henry blinked, surprised. "Tanya won't—" "I don't care what Tanya won't do either. He's my grandson, and I've already missed 7 years." I continued writing. "Third, we need a second opinion. Maybe a third." Henry was watching me with a mixture of confusion and something that looked like hope. "You're not throwing me out, calling the police?" I set down my pen and looked at my son, my firstborn, my little boy who had grown into a man who made terrible choices, a man who was now facing the ultimate consequence. "What you did was wrong," I said quietly. "Illegal, dishonest, and it's going to take time for me to process all of it." He nodded, accepting the judgment. "But no, Henry, I'm not throwing you out. Not today." I picked up my pen again. "Today we're going to start fixing what can be fixed." I didn't tell him that I was also planning item 4, calling a lawyer to understand exactly what legal jeopardy he, and possibly I, might be facing. Or item 5, figuring out how to access my retirement funds early without catastrophic penalties. Some burdens a mother carries alone. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. I nodded once, then pointed to the couch. "Go rest. We have a lot to do, and you'll need your strength." As he turned to go, I called after him. "Henry?" He looked back. "No more secrets. No more lies. I mean it." "I promise," he said. And for the first time since he appeared on my doorstep, I believed him. The next morning dawned gray and misty, the kind of early autumn day that makes you want to stay in bed with the covers pulled up. I'd barely slept, my mind racing with everything that had happened. Henry was still asleep on the couch. one arm dangling off the side, his breathing raspy and uneven. He looked so vulnerable in sleep, like the little boy who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. I moved quietly around the kitchen, making coffee and toast, trying to find some semblance of normalcy in this new, altered reality. My son was dying. My grandson didn't know I existed. My daughter had deliberately excluded me from her wedding. It felt like I was living in someone else's life, a soap opera with too many tragic plot twists. When the coffee was ready, I carried a mug to the living room and set it on the end table. The movement made Henry stir, his eyes fluttering open. For a moment he looked confused. Then recognition dawned, and with it, a flash of shame. "Morning," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "There's toast if you want it." "Thanks," he mumbled, pushing himself up to a sitting position. He winced slightly, one hand moving to his side. "Pain bad?" I asked. He shrugged. "It's manageable." His eyes darted to his backpack on the floor. "I have medication. I'll take it after I eat something." I nodded and returned to the kitchen, giving him a moment to collect himself. When he joined me, his hair damp from splashing water on his face, he looked marginally more human. "I need to make some calls today," I said, sliding a plate of toast across the table to him. "Set up appointments with doctors, talk to my insurance company, try to sort out this mess." Henry nodded, taking a small bite of toast. "I have all the medical records on a flash drive," he said. "The real ones, with my name on them." He hesitated. "There's also something else you should see." He got up, moved to his backpack, and pulled out a worn manila envelope. It was yellowed with age, the corners soft and frayed. He handled it with a strange reverence, almost like it was something alive. "What's this?" I asked, as he placed it on the table between us. "A letter I wrote to you 6 years ago." His voice was tight, controlled. After what I did with your identity." I stared at the envelope. It was addressed to me in Henry's familiar handwriting, but there was no stamp, no postmark. "You never sent it?" "No." He sat back down, his fingers tapping nervously on the table. I never had the courage. I picked up the envelope, felt its weight. Something inside me didn't want to open it, didn't want to know what more painful truths it might contain. But I'd spent too many years hiding from difficult realities, pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. That approach hadn't served me well. With a deep breath, I tore open the seal and pulled out several pages of lined notebook paper, filled with Henry's cramped handwriting. The letter began without preamble. "Mom, if you're reading this, it probably means I'm dead, or in jail, or have finally found the courage to face what I've done. I hope it's the latter, but I'm not counting on it. Courage has never been my strong suit." My hands trembled slightly as I continued reading. Henry described in painful detail how he'd gotten involved with people who promised quick returns on investments, how he'd leveraged everything he had and then some, how panic had set in when it all began to collapse. "I told myself it was just borrowing," he wrote, "that I'd pay it all back before you ever knew, that I was protecting you from worry. But that was a lie I told myself to sleep at night. The truth is uglier. I was a coward who chose the easy way out, who risked the one person who'd never let me down." I glanced up at Henry, who was staring out the window, deliberately not watching me read. His profile was sharp against the light, so like his father's, it made my heart ache. The letter continued, detailing how he'd used my information to secure loans, to set up credit accounts, to buy time while his financial house of cards collapsed around him, how he'd been living with the fear of discovery for years, how the guilt had eaten away at him like acid. The final paragraph hit me like a physical blow. "The worst part isn't what I did. It's that I did it to you, the one person who always believed in me, who worked 3 jobs to put me through college, who never once put herself first. I stole more than your identity, Mom. I stole your trust, and I don't know if there's forgiveness for that kind of theft. I wouldn't blame you if there isn't." I folded the letter carefully and slipped it back into the envelope. Henry was still looking away, his jaw tight, shoulders hunched as if bracing for a blow. "Why show me this now?" I asked quietly. He finally turned to face me, his eyes red-rimmed. "Because I don't want to die with this between us. Because you deserve to know exactly what kind of son you have. He swallowed hard. Because if you're going to help me now, and God knows I don't deserve it, you should know everything. I studied his face, searching for the boy I'd raised, the one who'd once left a tooth fairy note asking her to give his quarter to the kid down the street who needed it more. He was still in there somewhere, beneath the mistakes and the fear and the illness. I knew, I said finally. What? Henry looked confused. I knew something was wrong with my credit. 3 years ago, I got declined for a store card, which had never happened before. When I checked my report, there were discrepancies. I clasped my hands together on the table. I didn't investigate further. I think part of me suspected, and I didn't want to know. Henry's face crumpled. I'm so sorry, Mom. We both made choices, I said softly. I chose not to see what was happening. That's on me. No, he said fiercely. Don't do that. Don't take responsibility for my mistakes. I did this. I nodded slowly. Yes, you did, and it was wrong. But holding on to anger won't help either of us now, will it? A silence fell between us, heavy with all that had been said and all that still remained. Outside, a garbage truck rumbled down the street, the everyday world continuing as if nothing had changed. But everything had. What happens now? Henry asked, his voice small. I took a deep breath. Now we get dressed. We go see your son, my grandson, and we start fixing what can be fixed. He nodded, the faintest flicker of hope in his eyes. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a beginning. Tanya's apartment was in a converted brownstone in Dorchester, a modest third-floor walk-up with bicycles chained in the hallway and the smell of curry drifting from a neighbor's unit. Henry had insisted on driving, though I could tell each step up the narrow staircase was painful for him. By the time we reached the top landing, he was breathing heavily, one hand pressed against his side. You should have let me come alone, I whispered as we stood outside apartment 3C. I could have explained everything. Henry shook his head, leaning against the wall to catch his breath. No, I need to be here. I need to... He trailed off as the door swung open. A slender woman with dark hair twisted into a messy bun stood in the doorway. She wore faded jeans and a Boston University sweatshirt, a dish towel slung over one shoulder. Her eyes widened when she saw Henry, then narrowed as they shifted to me. What are you doing here? She asked Henry, her voice sharp with surprise. It's not your weekend. I know, Henry said, straightening up with visible effort. Tanya, this is my mother, Barbara. Mom, this is Tanya. Recognition flickered across Tanya's face, followed by confusion. Your mother? She looked me over skeptically. I thought... She stopped herself, glancing back into the apartment. Josh is doing homework. Can we come in, please? Henry asked. We need to talk. Tanya hesitated, her hand tightening on the doorframe. Is this about money? Because if it is... It's not, Henry interrupted. It's important. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't. Something in his tone must have convinced her. With a reluctant nod, she stepped back, opening the door wider. The apartment was small but neat, with mismatched furniture and colorful artwork taped to the walls. School books and papers were spread across a coffee table, where a dark-haired boy sat cross-legged on the floor, hunched over a math workbook. My heart stuttered in my chest. My grandson. 7 years old, and I'd never even known he existed. Josh, Tanya said, your dad's here. And this is your grandmother. The boy looked up, his eyes, so much like Henry's, moving curiously between us. Hi, he said, a little uncertainly. Hello, Josh, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. It's very nice to meet you. Tanya gestured toward a small dining area. Let's sit. As we moved to the table, she whispered to Josh, 15 more minutes on that math, then you can take a break, okay? We settled around the table, an awkward triangle of strangers connected by blood and secrets. Tanya folded her arms across her chest, a defensive posture that spoke volumes. So, she said, looking between us, what's this about? Henry cleared his throat. There are some things you need to know, about me, about us. He glanced at me, then back to Tanya. First, I want you to know that my mother didn't know about Josh until last night. That was my decision, not hers. Tanya's eyes widened slightly, then darted to me. I assumed you didn't want to be involved, she said. Henry said your relationship was complicated. That's one word for it, I said quietly. But it's not accurate. Henry chose not to tell me. Why now? Tanya asked, turning back to Henry. After all this time, why suddenly bring her into Josh's life? Henry took a deep breath. Because I'm sick, Tanya. Really sick. The color drained from her face. What do you mean sick? Cancer, he said, the word falling like a stone between us. Pancreatic with metastasis to the liver. It's terminal. Tanya's hand flew to her mouth. Oh my God, she whispered. Then her eyes hardening. How long have you known? About 8 months. 8 months? Her voice rose sharply. Then she glanced toward Josh and lowered it again. 8 months? And you're just telling me now? Telling us now? I didn't want to worry you or scare Josh. Henry's voice was barely audible. I thought I could handle it. I thought I had time. That wasn't your decision to make. Tanya hissed, tears forming in her eyes. He's your son. He deserves to know his father is... She broke off, unable to say the word. I know, Henry said, his own eyes glistening. I've made a lot of bad decisions, but I'm trying to fix what I can now. I watched this exchange in silence, feeling like an intruder in their grief. But when Tanya turned to me, I saw something beyond anger in her eyes, a desperate kind of hope. And that's where you come in? She asked. You're going to what? Take over? Be there for Josh when Henry's gone? The question hit me like a physical blow. I hadn't thought that far ahead. I'd been so focused on meeting my grandson, on sorting out Henry's medical situation, that I hadn't fully processed what would come after. I want to be part of Josh's life, I said carefully. How that looks, well, that's something we would need to figure out together. But yes, I want to be there for him. Tanya studied me for a long moment, as if trying to read the truth in my face. He needs stability, she said finally. With everything that's going to happen, he'll need that more than ever. I nodded, understanding the unspoken question. Could I provide that stability? After everything that had happened with my own children, was I capable of being the grandmother Josh needed? Before I could respond, Henry reached into his pocket and pulled out a small voice recorder, the kind journalists use for interviews. He placed it on the table between us. There's something else you both need to hear, he said. Something I recorded at Melissa's wedding. Tanya frowned. Your sister's wedding? What does that have to do with any of this? Everything, Henry said grimly. It has to do with everything. He pressed play, and a woman's voice filled the small kitchen. Melissa's voice, slightly slurred, clearly intoxicated. Don't get why you're so upset. It's just Mom. It's not like she matters to anyone anymore. A man's voice, my ex-husband's, responded. Keep your voice down, for God's sake. Why? Everyone knows she's just a sad old woman who can't let go of the past. Even her precious Henry's figured that out. Why do you think he keeps that kid of his away from her? My heart constricted painfully in my chest. I glanced at Tanya, who was listening with wide eyes. The recording continued, Melissa's voice growing more venomous. We're better off without her. And once we get those papers signed, we can finally sell that house and be done with her for good. What papers? This was Henry's voice now, tight with anger. The ones Dad's lawyer drew up, declaring her incompetent. Medical evaluation's already done. Or well, it will be once we submit the paperwork with Henry's signature on it. She'll never know what hit her. The recording ended, leaving a heavy silence in its wake. Tanya was staring at Henry, her expression a mixture of shock and disgust. You were going to sign papers declaring your mother incompetent? She asked in disbelief. No, Henry said firmly. I never agreed to that. Never even knew about it until that moment. That's why I left the wedding. That's why I went to my mother's house in the middle of the night. He turned to me, his eyes pleading. I swear, Mom, I had no idea what they were planning. But when I heard it, when I realized what they wanted to do to you, that's when I knew I had to come clean. About everything. I believed him. Despite everything, I believed him. The son I raised would never have agreed to something so cruel, so calculating. We need to be careful, I said quietly. If what Melissa said is true, they already have some kind of medical evaluation prepared. We need to figure out what we're dealing with. Tanya looked between us, her initial hostility replaced by something more complex. You need a lawyer, she said decisively. A good one. I know, I agreed. But first we need time. Time for Henry to get proper treatment under his own name. Time for me to get to know my grandson. Time to figure out how to protect ourselves. Time, Henry repeated softly, the irony not lost on any of us. Time was the one thing he didn't have. From the living room, Josh called out, Mom, I finished my math. Can I play with Dad now? Tanya looked at Henry, a silent question in her eyes. He nodded, a small, grateful smile touching his lips. Yes, she called back. Come say hello to your grandmother first. As Josh approached the table, his curious eyes taking in the three adults and their serious expressions, I felt a fierce, protective surge, unlike anything I'd experienced in years. This child, this innocent boy, who had no idea of the complicated web surrounding him, deserved better than the mess we adults had created. And somehow, some way, I was going to make sure he got it. The autumn morning dawned bright and crisp, a perfect New England day with golden sunlight filtering through the red and orange leaves still clinging to the maple trees that lined my street. I stood at my kitchen window, sipping coffee, and watching as Henry's rental car pulled into my driveway. Today was the day. Josh was coming to visit. After our meeting at Tanya's apartment 3 weeks ago, we'd established a careful routine. Henry would visit Josh whenever his health permitted, and I would join them occasionally, slowly building a relationship with my grandson. It had been Tanya's idea to have Josh come to my house today, so he can see where his dad spent time as a kid, she'd said. Her initial suspicion had softened into something like cautious alliance. We were both determined to protect Josh from the storm that was coming. I'd spent the entire previous day preparing, baking chocolate chip cookies. Henry had mentioned they were Josh's favorite, digging out old photo albums, and transforming my spare bedroom into a space a 7-year-old boy might enjoy. I'd even found some of Henry's old toys in the attic, wooden blocks, and a train set that had somehow survived decades of storage. The car doors opened, and my heart skipped as Josh emerged, his dark hair tousled by the wind, a red backpack slung over one shoulder. Henry followed more slowly, and I noticed with a pang how much weight he'd lost in just these few weeks. The treatments we'd arranged, now properly under his own name, were taking their toll. But he smiled as Josh bounded up the walkway, the boy's energy a stark contrast to his father's careful movements. "Grandma," Josh called out, the words still new and experimental on his tongue. "Dad says you have cookies," I laughed, opening the door wide. "I certainly do, and I can't wait for you to try them." Josh darted past me into the house, his curious eyes taking in everything at once. Henry followed, giving me a tired smile. "He's been talking about this visit all week," he said quietly as we watched Josh explore the living room, examining the photographs on the mantel with careful fingers. "Thank you for doing this." "Don't thank me," I replied. This is what I should have been doing all along." The morning passed in a blur of activity. Josh was a whirlwind of questions and observations, examining every corner of my house with the natural curiosity of childhood. He was particularly fascinated by the photographs of Henry as a boy. "Dad, is that really you?" he asked, pointing to a faded picture of 10-year-old Henry holding up a fish he'd caught. "That's me," Henry confirmed, sitting beside his son on the couch. "Your grandma took me fishing every summer at Lake Winnipesaukee." "Can we go fishing?" Josh asked, looking between us with hopeful eyes. A shadow passed over Henry's face, the question of future, of time, of possibilities rapidly narrowing. I stepped in smoothly. "I think that's a wonderful idea," I said. "Maybe when spring comes." Henry shot me a grateful look. We were both becoming adept at this dance, acknowledging the reality of his illness while still allowing Josh to hope, to plan, to look forward. After lunch, Henry grew visibly tired, his movements slowing, his complexion paling. "Why don't you go rest for a bit?" I suggested. "Josh and I can work on that puzzle we started." Henry nodded gratefully and retreated to the guest room. Josh and I continued assembling the jigsaw puzzle on the coffee table, a detailed image of a sailing ship that had once belonged to Henry. "My dad is sick, isn't he?" Josh asked suddenly, his small fingers pausing over a puzzle piece. "Like really sick?" My heart constricted. Children always know more than we give them credit for. "Yes," I said gently. "He is." Josh nodded, his face solemn. "Mom cries sometimes when she thinks I'm asleep." He fitted another piece into place with careful precision. "Is he going to die?" The directness of the question took my breath away. I'd been preparing for this moment, but now that it was here, I found myself at a loss. How do you explain mortality to a 7-year-old? How do you balance truth with hope? "Your dad is very sick," I said finally, "and the doctors are doing everything they can to help him. But yes, honey, he might die." Josh absorbed this, his eyes fixed on the puzzle. "If he dies, will I still get to come see you?" "Oh, Josh," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "Yes, always. I'm your grandmother, and that won't ever change, no matter what happens." He seemed satisfied with this answer, returning to the puzzle with renewed focus. After a moment, he said, "I have a picture of you, you know." "You do?" This surprised me. Josh nodded. "Dad gave it to me a long time ago. He said you were his mom, and that meant you were my grandma, too. But he said you lived far away." He glanced up at me. "But you don't live far away." "No," I agreed. "I don't. Why didn't we visit you before?" Such a simple question, with such a complicated answer. "Sometimes," I said carefully, "grown-ups make mistakes. We think we're doing the right thing, but we're not. Your dad made a mistake by not bringing you to see me earlier." "Because he was sick?" "No, honey. This was before he got sick. He was afraid, I think." "Afraid of what?" Josh's eyes were wide and curious. "Afraid that I might be angry with him about some things that happened a long time ago." I smoothed back a strand of his dark hair, so like Henry's. But he was wrong about that. "I would have been so happy to meet you." Josh considered this, then nodded, accepting the explanation with the simple logic of childhood. "I'm glad we know each other now," he said, returning to the puzzle. "Me too," I whispered, blinking back tears. "More than you know." Later, when Henry woke from his nap, we all went to the small park down the street. The playground was nearly empty on this weekday afternoon, and Josh raced ahead to claim the swings, his energy seemingly boundless. Henry and I settled on a bench nearby, close enough to watch but allowing Josh his independence. The autumn sun warmed our faces as a gentle breeze scattered leaves across the ground. "He asked me if you were going to die," I said quietly, watching Josh pump his legs on the swing, going higher and higher. Henry's breath caught. "What did you tell him?" "The truth, that you're very sick, and that the doctors are trying to help, but that you might die." Henry nodded slowly. "And how did he take it?" "Like a child, sad but accepting. Then he wanted to know if he'd still get to visit me if—" I couldn't finish the sentence. "And?" "I told him always." I turned to look at Henry directly. "I meant it. No matter what happens between you and me, between me and Melissa, between me and your father, Josh is my grandson. I won't lose him." Henry's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you," he whispered. "That's all I wanted to hear." He paused, watching his son swing toward the sky. "I've been so afraid that when I'm gone, everyone will just move on, like I never existed." I reached over and took his hand, the skin paper thin over prominent bones. "Not everyone," I promised. "Not me, and not Josh." We sat in silence then, watching the boy who connected us. This miracle I'd almost missed knowing. This life that would carry forward pieces of all of us long after we were gone. Winter came early to Boston that year. By mid-November, the city was blanketed in snow, the kind that muffles sound and makes the world seem smaller, more intimate. I stood at my bedroom window, watching fat flakes drift past the streetlights, adding to the 4 inches that had already accumulated on the ground. The weather forecast warned of more to come, but I wasn't worried about that now. My thoughts were elsewhere, floating through memories of the past 6 months like leaves on a quiet stream. Henry had passed away 2 weeks ago, on a surprisingly warm November afternoon. He'd been at home, my home, where he'd spent his final months after the treatment stopped working. It had been peaceful, as these things go. One moment he was there, telling Josh a story about catching fireflies as a boy, and the next he was gone, slipping away between one breath and the next, his hands still resting on his son's dark hair. The funeral had been small, just as Henry wanted. Tanya and Josh, a few friends from his college days, his oncologist who'd become something of a friend, and me. Melissa hadn't come, though I'd sent word through my lawyer. Neither had my ex-husband. Their absence was like a bruise, painful when touched, but fading a little more each day. Now as the snow fell outside my window, I finished tying the ribbon on a small package wrapped in blue paper, Josh's favorite color. Tomorrow would be Thanksgiving, and he and Tanya would be joining me. Our first holiday together, our first holiday without Henry. I'd spent the day cooking, following recipes my mother had taught me, finding comfort in the familiar motions of kneading dough and chopping vegetables. The doorbell rang, startling me from my reverie. I wasn't expecting anyone, especially not in this weather. Pulling my cardigan tighter around me, I made my way downstairs. Through the peephole, I saw a familiar face I hadn't expected. Sandra Williams, the lawyer I'd hired to help untangle the legal mess with Henry's medical bills and to draft my new will. Her silver-streaked hair was dusted with snow, her cheeks pink from the cold. "Sandra," I said, opening the door. "This is a surprise. Is everything okay?" She stamped the snow from her boots before stepping inside. "Everything's fine, Barbara. I'm sorry to drop by unannounced, but I was in the neighborhood for another client, and I wanted to deliver these documents personally." She patted her leather briefcase. "The weather's supposed to get worse, and I didn't want to risk them being delayed." I led her into the living room, where a small fire crackled in the fireplace. "Can I get you some tea? Coffee?" "Tea would be wonderful," she said, settling onto the sofa. "It's bitter out there." As I prepared the tea in the kitchen, my mind raced. What documents could be so important they couldn't wait until after the holiday? Had there been some problem with the trust I'd set up for Josh? When I returned with 2 steaming mugs, Sandra had several folders spread out on the coffee table. "I have good news," she said, accepting the tea gratefully. "The insurance company has agreed to settle. They'll cover all of Henry's legitimate medical expenses and drop any investigation into the identity fraud." Relief washed over me. We'd been fighting with the insurance company for months, trying to separate Henry's fraudulent claims from the legitimate ones, trying to ensure I wouldn't be held financially responsible for his deception. "That's wonderful," I said, sinking into the armchair across from her. "One less thing to worry about." "Indeed." Sandra sipped her tea, then set it down carefully. "I've also finalized all the paperwork for Josh's trust. It's exactly as you requested. Funds for education, housing, medical expenses if needed, with age-appropriate distributions starting at 18. And Tanya has full access for his immediate needs. Yes, with the oversight provisions we discussed." Sandra passed me a folder. "Everything's there for your records." I nodded, thumbing through the documents. It still amazed me how much my life had changed in 6 months. From a lonely woman excluded from her daughter's wedding to the financial guardian of a grandson I'd only just met. From a mother betrayed to a mother saying a final goodbye. "There's one more thing," Sandra said, pulling out another thinner folder. "Your updated will is complete. I need you to review it once more before I file it officially." I took the folder, feeling its weight, literal and metaphorical, in my hands. This will was different from any I'd drafted before. It wasn't just about distributing assets. It was about preserving memory, about ensuring that the truth survived, about creating a legacy that couldn't be erased. "I've included everything you requested," Sandra continued. "The letters to be delivered, the conditions for the house sale, the provisions for Josh beyond the trust, and," she hesitated, "the specific exclusions you discussed." The exclusions. That had been the hardest part to write, to formalize, to acknowledge that my daughter, my Melissa, had chosen to cut me from her life so completely that I was now doing the same in death. Not out of vengeance, but out of a sad recognition of reality. "Thank you," I said quietly. "I know this wasn't a standard will." Sandra's eyes softened. "Barbara, in 30 years of practice, I've learned there's no such thing as a standard will. Each one is as unique as the person writing it, as complex as the life they've lived. I smiled at that. Well, my life certainly took some unexpected turns these past months. Life often does. She closed her briefcase and stood. I should get going before the roads get worse. Take your time reviewing everything. We can finalize after the holiday. As I walked her to the door, Sandra paused. Barbara, may I speak frankly? As a friend rather than your lawyer? I nodded, surprised. The provisions you've made for Josh are generous and thoughtful, but the most valuable thing you're giving him isn't financial. She touched my arm lightly. It's the story of his father. All of it, the good and the bad. The truth, preserved in your words. That's a gift beyond measure. After Sandra left, I returned to the living room and opened the will again, turning to the personal statement I'd included, the part that went beyond legal language and financial provisions. It began simply, "To my grandson Joshua Henry Dawson, I leave these words along with my worldly possessions. Your father was a complicated man who made many mistakes, but he loved you without reservation or condition. In his final months, he found the courage that had eluded him for most of his life. Remember him not for his failures, but for his final act of love, bringing you into my life when he could have chosen an easier path." The statement continued for several pages, telling the story of Henry's life as I'd known it, acknowledging his flaws while celebrating his strengths, preserving his memory in all its imperfect humanity. It wasn't the kind of thing usually included in a legal document, but Sandra had understood why it mattered. I closed the folder and returned to the window. The snow was falling more heavily now, blanketing the world in pristine white. Tomorrow, Josh and Tanya would arrive for Thanksgiving dinner. We'd make new memories to add to the old. We'd speak of Henry, keeping him alive in our stories. And someday, when Josh was old enough, I'd share with him the full truth of his father's life, not to burden him, but to free him from the weight of unspoken histories. Outside, a plow rumbled down the street, clearing a path through the accumulating snow. Inside, I felt a similar clearing within my heart, not an erasure of pain, but a making of space for what lay ahead. I'd been excluded from one family gathering, yes, but I'd created the possibility for countless others. I picked up my mug and raised it in a silent toast. "To you, Henry," I whispered. "To the son who came back, even if it was at the 11th hour." And in that quiet moment, I felt a sense of peace settle over me like the snow outside, covering all the jagged edges, making everything whole again, if only for a while. Family is supposed to be our safe harbor, our unwavering support system. But what happens when those meant to love us the most become the architects of our deepest pain? Barbara's story reminds us that sometimes the most profound acts of self-love come disguised as difficult choices. Canceling credit cards, blocking accounts, and refusing to be erased from existence simply because we've grown older or inconvenient. What would you have done in Barbara's shoes? Would you have continued silently funding the lives of children who excluded you from their milestone moments? Or would you, like her, finally draw a line in the sand? Sometimes the greatest gift we can give ourselves is the courage to say no more, not out of vengeance, but out of self-respect. And sometimes, as with Henry, the most unexpected redemption stories emerge from our darkest moments of betrayal. In the end, Barbara didn't just write a will. She wrote a testament to the power of truth, forgiveness, and the legacy we choose to leave behind. She found the strength to forgive without forgetting, to love without enabling, and to build a new family connection with her grandson when the old ones crumbled. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to our channel, like this video, and share it with someone who might need to hear that it's never too late to rewrite your own ending. Tell us in the comments, what part of this story resonated with you the most, and where are you watching from?